So I'll start with Tunisia. A key thing to say here is many people misunderstand what happens in revolutions, thinking that it is grievances and just poverty and class struggles that cause revolutions. And I would beg to differ because statistically speaking, or the facts say otherwise, because if you were to predict in December 2010, and in fact, December 2010, I was actually in Syria. I happened to be with my professor, Professor Marshall Gantz, working on training a group of Syrians on organizing. And we were actually invited by the Syrian regime, by the Syrian president's office back December 2010, because they themselves have noticed that they are out of touch with Syrian youth and they need to do something about it. And they invited us to train their youth, mostly, of course, Ba'ath Party youth, but some also Palestinians from Yarmouk camp and others. And we were genuinely surprised. Okay, you know what organizing is about. Like Marshall Gantz worked with Cesar Chavez and was part of the civil rights movement. But for us, it was testament to the fact that Arab regimes and Arab rulers knew that something was brewing and that they need to do something about it. So the point I wanted to say here is that if you were to think of December 2010, Tunisia would have been the last place you'd expect a revolution because they were doing well economically. Of all the Arab countries, they had the better socioeconomic data, they had more education, they had a bigger middle class, so on and so forth. And they're the more homogeneous population than other Arab countries. So you'd expect it in Egypt, in Syria, and other places, but not in Tunisia. But it still happened in Tunisia. Likewise, the first intifada and the second intifada in Palestine, the West Bank and Gaza were doing much better than other Arab countries, and still you had uprisings. My point here is that people don't revolt on poverty; they revolt against inequity and inequality and a sense of indignation. It's when they feel that something is so bad, people are willing to risk their life and take those sacrifice because the situation is so bad, they just cannot accept it anymore. So it's more about a real sense of dignity and self-worth, but also, which I believe is the spark, is the belief that change is possible, right? That's the tipping point. The moment you enough critical mass of people suddenly, for whatever reason, and it could be a wrong reason, believe that they can make a difference, suddenly the constellation of stars come together and change just cascades. So in the Tunisian example, as I said, like their situation wasn't as bad as other places, but two things were working for them. One was that they did have a big middle class that was well educated, and they had a lot of rights for women and reasonable civic civil society and what have you, and civic institutions. But also the opposition, Islamic, the Ghannouchi, which you can see here on the top center image. By the way, Farris, I cannot see the chat, so if there's something, a note to me, please prompt me.
Nizar, just so you know, what we'll do is we'll do a question and answer at the end. And what I'll do, let me just, as an admin note, if you have questions, go ahead and populate the chat with your questions now. And then I will play the MC on the questions, and I will turn, I will either ask a question if you like, or I'll turn preferably I'd rather turn the mic over to you. Again, we will shut the recording off. Laith, remind me if I forget to shut the recording off when we begin the Q&A session. Okay, over to you, Nizar. Thank you.
Thank you. So Ghannouchi and the Nahda, which is the Islamic faction in Tunisia, and that's true of all the Arab world. In general, in the Arab world, you have two main factions. We don't need to go into the history. I'm happy to go into the history in the Q&A, but basically you have two schools of thought. One that believes that for us to progress as Arabs, as Tunisians, as Algerians, whatever, we need to emulate the West. The West is modern and uses science, what have you. So we need to learn from them and become like them so that we are not backwards. And another school of thought that says, no, the problem is the West, and the problem is that we moved away from Islam. Ergo, the solution is to go back to pure, uncorrupted, unadulterated Islam for us to really progress, because when we were good Muslims, we were an empire, right? So these are basically, in a huge nutshell, the two main schools of thought that divide Arabs in general, and I would argue the Muslim majority countries. So here in Tunisia, it reflected in Nahda, Ghannouchi, the Muslim Brotherhood, for example, right? And Baji Qaid al-Sibsi, which was the Tunisian president, he was part of the old regime as well, which was secular and was part of that school that believed that, no, we need to emulate the West. In fact, in Tunisia, it struck me, there were Tunisians who, in fact, like Tunisian women who were wearing the veil, the hijab, who did not speak Arabic. They actually only spoke French. That's the level of, identification with France. There were Tunisian parliamentarians who went to France after Nahda won the elections, and they pleaded with France to reoccupy Tunisia and save them from the Islamists, right? So this is the level of polarization that was there. However, to their credit, people like Ghannouchi, which if in the middle picture, you see him with Abdullah Azzam. For those of you who do not know who Abdullah Azzam is, he's a very famous Palestinian who was instrumental in radical militant Islamic thought and was a mentor of Osama bin Laden. So Ghannouchi is seen here with him, because back then in the black and white picture, I don't remember, I think this was taken in the 80s, probably a bit earlier. But Ghannouchi was, and Nahda was part of that, let's say, universe. And it was the actual experience of politics that moderated his views. So in the top middle picture, again, you see Ghannouchi is in the blue suit. Qaid al-Sibsi is in the middle raising his hands. And behind them is the guy in the white robe and the turban. This guy is called Muru, Abdullah Muru. He's an Islamic thinker, Tunisian Islamic thinker. He's the basically the spiritual leader of Nahda. But in Tunisia, I learned that he's actually a spiritual leader for a lot of Islamists, including Erdogan, the Turkish Islamic movement. And what's interesting about Muru is that he is genuinely progressive and progressive Islamist, in the sense that his theory of change is that, yes, Islam is the source of our power, but Islam, the source of the power of Islam is precisely that it's a malleable, elastic religion that functions in every space and every place, every time and any time and any place. Therefore, our job as good Muslims is to figure out, what does the righteous Islam look like in this day and age, in this place. So Muru was instrumental in the theological, political, not only arguments, but actual cultural change in Nahda, to think of, while before they were more militant, of course, they were militant because they were also politically stifled. They were jailed and they were tortured, right? Algeria, 1990, and even before that, Abdel Nasser in the 60s and other places. But that hard, internal work about what is our political platform and what is our religious duty vis-a-vis that political platform, that is Abdullah Muru. So unlike, let's say, Khomeini in Iran, Abdullah Muru was more around really Islam, of course, in the Tunisian context, but he's really an Islamist. He believes in Islam, right? And he's not worried about creating this. He would be very happy if there is this great Muslim empire, but to his understanding, that's not his job, right? That it definitely has to be by consent. And why do I say all of that? Because what the Tunisians did right is, and I guess a lot of it had to do with their luck, to the fact that they happened to be two very big factions that were unable to destroy the other, right? You didn't have one hegemonous group like in Egypt, where you had the army that was hegemonous. In Tunisia, they had to work with each other. But before the revolution, they had 5 years of the opposition meeting with each other. So the Islamists, the communists, the secular nationalists, and the unions, they have been meeting with each other for over 5 years, discussing how they can affect the regime, how they can change the regime in Tunisia in peaceful ways. But when they were doing that, they were actually having conversations about their political theories and what is more important to them. So in the Islamists, while disagreeing with the communists and the secularists, they understood what was really important to them. And likewise, the secularists understood what was really important to the Islamists. So after the revolution, which they all, for their credit, they all participated in, when there was a crisis in 2 years afterwards, when the Nahda won elections and there were two prominent secular figures were assassinated, there was a lot of pressure for Nahda to quit. What helped was, it was an actual constitutional crisis, was because they had 5 years of conversations before, they had the relationships. They disagreed with each other a lot, the leaders, but they trusted each other and they knew each other, right? So they were able to work out what was really important to each side. And Nahda's point was, we're fine leaving the government. What is more important to us, that you, the others, respect and protect the democratic system. We do not want to stay in power if people do not want us in power, but we want to make sure that this is not one man, one vote, one time, and that's it. Because they saw what happened in Egypt, right? And both parties, again, to their credit, were prudent enough to understand they're not going to get everything. They're going to need to figure out what is necessary and what is expendable. And they did a very good job in doing that. Not to belabor the point, but because I believe Tunisia is a very important example that all of us need to lobby our government to protect and support, because it is actually the most important Arab experiment in democracy. What Nahda was very progressive in compared to other Islamists across the Arab world, including more progressive than the one in Turkey, Erdogan, was that when they came to the constitution, Nahda itself understood the importance of buy-in by the population. That is, it was a Nahda that did not push for an Islamist constitution. There are a lot of things that other Islamists would have never accepted in a constitution in a country that has a majority, that is a Muslim majority country. For example, not saying that Quran is the source of legislation and things like that, and women's rights and what have you. And Nahda accepted all of these compromises. And when I spoke with people from Nahda, they said, of course, because for us, it's more, rather than having a constitution that is more Islamic or Islamic leaning, and have it voted 51%, it was more important to get a constitution that's maybe only 5% Islamic, but gets accepted by 95% of Tunisians, because this is the bedrock upon which we're going to build the political system. So we definitely need it to be something that all Tunisians accept, because our main interest is a representative political system. Yes, we want an Islamic state, but we do not want it without the consent of the majority of the people. We do not want to rule against the consent, right? So that prudence was critical, but that also wouldn't have happened have you not had a political system that, like Nahda understood that there was stuff that they could not get away with in Tunisia, right? They knew that there was legislation that would just not happen. And that's because there was a very strong culture and civil society that was pro-liberal rights and what have you. So Ghannouchi, next to Abdullah Azzam, is different from Ghannouchi of today. And in fact, in that crisis, while Nahda had a lot of, was an umbrella for a lot of Islamists, after the two assassinations, they took a political decision to distance themselves and criticize those radical Islamists in Tunisia that condoned the assassinations, right? So they willfully let go of a big chunk of their electorate, right? Because they stood for the democratic system and did not stand for their partisan, benefit. And this is a lesson that I would like Democrats and Republicans here in the US to learn from. And again, not because Nahda are these amazing angels, no, because they're just, practically speaking, they understood that their core interest is in maintaining buy-in by the population on the democratic system. And I will end with the current president. You see him on the top right picture. He's a person that was from outside of politics. And in fact, in the last elections, both Nahda and Nida Tunis, which were the secularists, both of them lost to somebody who was a complete outsider. Like, I wouldn't say, like, people say that he's their Trump, but he's like not like Trump. But the only thing that he's like Trump is that he was from outside the political elites. So the Tunisians managed to actually have a very vibrant political system that allows or that defies political capture. And that is a model that we all need to protect, again, thanks to a very vibrant and strong civil society. But with economic challenges, that is threatened. And that's my final pitch on why we need to support Tunisia. Now,